The morning sun glinted off the Reynolds Refuge sign as Margaret, a silver-haired woman with laugh lines and calloused hands, scattered feet across her yard. At 65, the former veterinary technician had traded the sterile walls of animal clinics for this 2-acre sanctuary at the edge of Cedar Creek. 3 years into retirement, she'd become something of a local character, the woman who talked to vegetables and rescued animals that nobody wanted. Breakfast time, troublemakers, she called out, and immediately the ground seemed to come alive as 4 massive white geese charged toward her with wings half spread and throaty honks that echoed across the property. These weren't ordinary barnyard fowl. Gertrude, Gerald, Giselle, and George had been the terror of the now-shuttered Sweet Valley Petting Zoo before Margaret had taken them in. "You'd think I never feed you," she chuckled as they surrounded her, accepting treats from her palm with surprising gentleness. Few people knew that beneath their intimidating exteriors, these birds had been hand-raised and were as loyal as dogs, to Margaret, at least. To strangers? Well, that was another story entirely. From her back porch, Margaret could see the garish rooftops of Harrington Heights, the new luxury subdivision encroaching on what used to be peaceful farmland. The developer had promised countryside charm with modern amenities, which apparently translated to minxy mansions pressed against her property line. Still, she'd managed cordial relationships with most neighbors who respected the clearly posted private property and beware of guard key signs, until the house directly adjacent to hers sold last month. "Excuse me, excuse me." The voice cut through the peaceful morning like a chainsaw. Margaret was kneeling in her garden when she first encountered Valerie Harrington, a 40-something woman with an asymmetrical blonde bob, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, and a tiny white poodle tucked under one arm like an accessory. "Your farm animals," Valerie pronounced the words as if describing something obscene, "woke me at 6 this morning with their honking. I have a noise ordinance booklet right here." She waggled a pristine municipal brochure that looked like it had been printed specifically for this confrontation. Margaret stood slowly, wiping soil from her hands. "My geese have been here for 3 years. They're part of a rescue sanctuary." "Well, I've been here for 3 days, and I'm part of the Harrington Heights HOA." Valerie countered with a smirk that suggested this trump card ended all discussion. "We have standards." The next morning, Margaret discovered her property line littered with expensive-looking dog waste bags, filled and deliberately left along her fence. The day after, she caught Valerie on her security camera deliberately opening Margaret's gate and walking her poodle, now sporting a rhinestone collar, directly to Margaret's prized heirloom tomato plants. By week's end, Margaret confronted Valerie mid-trespass, only to be met with a dismissive wave. "This unused space would make a perfect dog park for the neighborhood," Valerie declared, gesturing broadly at Margaret's carefully tended land. "Nobody needs this much property anyway. I've already mentioned it to the neighbors." She strutted away, heels somehow not sinking into the soft earth, leaving Margaret speechless. True to her word, the invasion began. Dog owners Margaret had never met suddenly appeared, stepping over her no trespassing signs with leashed retrievers and bulldogs. When confronted, they blinked in confusion. But Valerie said this was going to be a community dog area. Some looked embarrassed when Margaret explained it was private property. Others seemed annoyed, as if she were the one being unreasonable. Through her security cameras, Margaret noticed a pattern. Valerie was the scout, always checking if Margaret's truck was gone before ushering in new trespassers. "I understand your frustration, ma'am, but this seems like a neighborly dispute." Officer Jenkins shifted uncomfortably on Margaret's porch, barely glancing at the security footage she'd collected of Valerie's repeated trespassing. "Have you tried talking to her? Maybe over coffee?" "I've tried reasoning with her 3 times, Margaret replied, struggling to keep her voice level. "She called me a land hoarder and suggested I should be grateful for the community interest in my property." The officer scratched his head. "Well, I could talk to her, but without physical damage." 2 days later, Margaret's security app pinged while she was at her doctor's appointment. The live feed showed Valerie not just trespassing, but hosting what appeared to be an organized event. By the time Margaret arrived home, her sanctuary had been transformed into chaos. 7 dogs of various sizes raced across her yard, digging craters in her herb garden. A Labrador relieved itself against her beehive. 2 terriers chased her terrified chickens into the underbrush. And there, in the center of it all, sat Valerie in a monogrammed portable lawn chair, sipping from a tumbler emblazoned with Boss Babe, while holding court for a circle of neighbors. "What is the meaning of this?" Margaret demanded, her voice trembling with a combination of rage and disbelief. Valerie looked up with theatrical surprise. "Oh, I didn't think you'd be home so early. We're just enjoying the neighborhood dog park." "This isn't a dog park. This is private property, my property." "Actually," Valerie replied, raising her voice so all could hear, "we're considering petitioning the town to designate this area as a community space under the Unused Land Ordinance." She lifted her phone, displaying a document. "I've already got 63 signatures and the support of 3 council members." As if on cue, several people nodded in agreement. One man, wearing an expensive-looking polo shirt, added, "It's nothing personal. Property values increase with community amenities." Margaret stood there, watching these strangers casually discuss the theft of her land, her retirement dream, her sanctuary. The law wouldn't help. Reason hadn't worked. As she trudged back to her house, hearing Valerie's performative laughter behind her, Margaret passed the secure pen, where her 4 geese watched the proceedings with unusual stillness. Gertrude, the largest, met Margaret's gaze with a gleam that almost seemed like understanding. Margaret paused. For the first time since this nightmare began, she smiled. Margaret stayed up late examining town ordinances and property rights, but found herself staring at the same paragraph for 20 minutes as her mind wandered. She kept thinking of her father's old saying, "Sometimes the best solution isn't in the books, it's in the barnyard." Her eyes drifted to an old photo on her desk, herself at 23, working at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, successfully handling a notoriously aggressive Canada goose that had injured 3 other handlers. She'd had her way with difficult birds even then. The next morning, Margaret made a show of loading gardening supplies into her truck and driving away. But instead of heading to the garden center, she parked behind the old Henderson barn, just out of sight of her property, watching her security app on her phone. It took exactly 22 minutes. Valerie arrived first, cautiously opening the gate after checking for Margaret's truck. She wore pristine white capri pants and carried a small folding table. With a satisfied smile, she placed a professionally printed sign that read Harrington Heights Dog Social, 10 a.m. daily, near the entrance, then began directing the other arrivals to different parts of Margaret's yard. By 10:15, the group had grown to 9 people with 12 dogs. Valerie had positioned herself in the shade of Margaret's prized magnolia tree, her back to the goose enclosure, as she giggled with 2 other women wearing matching dog mom shirts. Margaret quietly let herself in through her back gate, approaching the goose pen unseen. Her 4 companions were already agitated, sensing the invasion. She knelt beside the enclosure. "Remember your training," she whispered, unlatching the gate. "Just like we practiced." 4 white blurs exploded from the pen. Gertrude, 24 pounds of protective fury, led the charge, her wingspan making her appear twice her size, as she thundered toward the interlopers with a battle cry that sounded prehistoric. Gerald and George moved with military precision, one flanking left, one right, effectively surrounding the trespassers before they could process what was happening. Giselle, always the strategist, made directly for Valerie. The first scream came from a man in golf attire as Gerald nipped sharply at his ankles. The second scream, significantly higher pitched, erupted when George positioned himself between a cluster of owners and the exit gate. But it was Valerie's shriek that could have shattered crystal when she turned to find Giselle inches from her face, wings spread, eyes locked on hers. Valerie stumbled backward, tripping over her own designer table. Her immaculate white pants met the freshly watered earth of Margaret's garden with a spectacular muddy splash. "Get them away!" she screamed, scrambling backward crab style as Giselle advanced with methodical determination. "These monsters are attacking us." The dogs, confronted with creatures who showed no fear and fought with coordinated precision, either cowered behind their owners or strained at leashes trying to escape. A chihuahua in a designer carrier began yapping hysterically as Gertrude stood atop a garden rock, wings extended like an avenging angel, unleashing a barrage of honks that drowned out all human voices. Margaret calmly walked onto her porch, leaned against the railing, and watched the chaos unfold. When Valerie spotted her, mascara now streaking down her face, Margaret simply shrugged. "My geese don't like trespassers," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. Funny thing about guard geese, they're actually used on farms across America. Better than dogs in some ways. They can't be bribed with treats, and they never, ever forget a face. "Oh my God, are you the lady?" Margaret looked up from her grocery cart to find a teenage cashier staring at her with unconcealed awe. Before she could answer, the girl thrust her phone forward, displaying a TikTok video entitled "K.A.N. Destroyed by ATASGEC" with over 2.3 million views. The shaky footage, apparently captured by one of the fleeing dog owners, showed Valerie's spectacular muddy fall, followed by her crab walking backward as Giselle advanced with wings spread. The video was set to the Jurassic Park theme music, with added cartoon sound effects and captions like "Miss" with the HONK, GT the BONK. Yes, those are my geese," Margaret admitted, suddenly self-conscious as other shoppers turned to look. "You're like internet famous. There are already remixes and everything." As it turned out, the Goose Justice, as it had been hashtagged, had resonated far beyond Cedar Creek. Local news picked up the story, interviewing neighbors who confirmed Valerie's unauthorized dog park scheme. Several admitted they'd been uncomfortable trespassing, but felt pressured by Valerie's insistence that the land would soon be community property anyway. The social media spotlight had unexpected consequences. The town council, initially receptive to Valerie's petition, now publicly clarified that no such unused land ordinance existed. 3 council members specifically denied having supported her proposal. Margaret's phone began filling with apologetic messages from neighbors who had participated in the trespassing. Some claimed they'd been misled about the property status. Others admitted they'd simply followed along without questioning. Meanwhile, Valerie launched a counter-offensive. Her complaint to animal control about dangerous attack birds received a prompt response, but not the one she'd anticipated. "Actually, ma'am," explained Officer Rodriguez of Animal Control as he scratched Gerald's neck feathers while the goose contentedly nibbled treats from his palm. "These birds are properly kept, well-trained, and were defending their legitimate territory from trespassers. They showed remarkable restraint. Geese can break bones with their wings if they want to." He flipped through his notepad. "However, I do need to address the reports of unleashed dogs harassing livestock on this property. That carries a fine of $250 per incident, and I count at least 7 documented occurrences on these security videos." Valerie's face cycled through several fascinating shades of red. The Cedar Creek Gazette ran a Sunday feature titled "Guard Geese: Nature's Answer to Modern Trespassing," complete with a photo of all 4 birds posed regally beside a beaming Margaret. The article highlighted the history of guard geese from ancient Rome to modern-day farms, noting that Margaret's geese were rescues trained to respond to specific commands. 2 weeks later, a moving truck appeared at Valerie's house. Neighborhood gossip revealed she'd accepted a job transfer to another state, claiming Cedar Creek lacked a certain community spirit. That evening, Margaret installed a beautiful new pond in her yard, watching as her 4 feathered heroes splashed joyfully in their reward. She'd also added a proper sign at her gate: "Protected by guard geese. They honk, they protect, but most importantly, they remember faces." As she sat on her porch swing, sipping lemonade and enjoying the restored peace of her sanctuary, Margaret reflected that respect wasn't something you could demand with petitions or social status. Sometimes it had to be taught, occasionally by teachers with feathers, webbed feet, and surprisingly effective teaching methods. The next morning, an unexpected knock at her door revealed a delegation of neighbors bearing garden plants to replace those damaged during the dog park phase. The unofficial leader, An older gentleman from down the road shuffled his feet awkwardly. "We should have spoken up sooner," he admitted. "But I have to ask, those geese of yours, could they possibly be trained to handle the neighborhood's coyote problem?" Margaret smiled. Perhaps her retirement would be more interesting than she'd planned after all.